Yeah, excited to share the platform today with Parth to talk about AI investments for logic apps. And to begin with, we will first talk about Workflow Assistant, which is a recent release we announced at Ignite, and it is in public preview now, which basically provides you a chat interface that helps answers any questions you have regarding logic apps, connectors, scenarios, best practices, anything, all within the designer and in the context of your workflows. What we've done is basically we are using several knowledge sources of logic apps and curating that information with the power of OpenAI and ChatGPT and bringing this wealth of knowledge at your fingertips. So with that, I will not be spending too much time on slides. I want to jump directly to the demos. But before I do that, I do want to make this session a bit interactive. So I would really appreciate if folks can use the link, the poll everywhere link I have here, and either join it from their web browsers or their phones. And I'll just have a few questions while I'm doing my presentation. If you can provide your responses, share your feedback, that would be great. And for anybody who is watching this session afterwards as a recording or and wants to reach out to us to talk about AI, I have a link in there. Please feel free to reach out because this is an evolving space and we would love to talk to you. So with that, I am going to jump to the demo. But before that, I need to do something very quickly. Sorry. All right, we have some. Give me 1 second, please. All right. And all right. So hopefully, I have started the polling now. So if you can go to that link, you will see some questions. And if you can provide a response to that while we look at the demo, that would be great. So let's jump into the demo. And what I have here is a Logic App standard workflow. Currently, Workflow Assistant is only available in Logic App standard and only through the portal. So not yet available in VS Code. Um, so we will run through a couple of use cases through different kind of questions in this demo. So to start your workflow assistant, you basically open your workflow, click on this assistant here, and it already shows you some examples on how it can be used. And let's use the first example here. So I am going to ask what this workflow does. As you can see, it's a very simple workflow, which is basically trying to run some Custo ADX queries and pull the data from there. So let's see what Workflow Assistant comes back with. And as you can see, the response from this from the workflow assistant gives you details of each and every individual step in this workflow and provides you a lot of details on what is happening within the each step. If you look at the actions I have to run Custo queries, it actually goes into the details of what the query is doing, how the results will be rendered, and provides all of that in explanation. So this is a very useful way when you are trying to collaborate on workflows that are not just built by you but are others, or you are working on something that is passed on to you and you really want to understand what it does. So a very effective way to learn what your code is doing. I also this also can be a good starting point if you want to create workflow documentation where you can simply leverage the content from the output of this action and persist it in your workflow documentation. And on that end, I do have a question as well for you. Uh, and please see if you see any value in there. So basically what I'm trying to ask is, like, if we provide an ability for you on what you just see in terms of describing the workflow, to download it as a markdown and put it in your GitHub repo or other places, would that be a useful feature? Would that be a useful capability that you would use? So now that we know what this workflow is doing, let's ask a little bit more specific question and see why or what is the purpose of scope in this workflow. As you can see, it returns the response back and very concisely explains you the purpose of the scope, which is primarily to group the actions together and encapsulate them so that you can manage them easily. Um, so when you have workflows, you can ask very specific questions, not just about the workflow, but about individual areas in the workflow where you need to learn a little bit more on what the purpose of those steps are or what they are doing. Now that we have asked some specific questions, let's uh, let's ask assistant about some specific features. So I want to add some tracked properties, and but I don't know how to do that. So I'm asking some questions around how do I add tracked properties to the workflow, and again it gives you some exam on how you do that, and in fact, it takes an example from your workflow of parse JSON action as an example, and also suggests you how you can use the output where name is one of those properties from the parse JSON action and use that. Now, in order to add this tracked property, I need to have an expression. So let's ask Copilot if it can help us build that expression. So, going to ask if I can get some help on building the expression. So the workflow assistant provides you the response with the exact expression that you can use to add a tracked property in this example, and use that. So I was trying this before, but let's try to add it again and use the output that came from my workflow assistant. Do a save, and this would basically add this tracked property, and wherever you are emitting the logging, this tracked property would be emitted along with our default telemetry. So you probably have done this before, but with workflow assistant, if you're new to the platform, or it can simply help you to pull in the expressions for the value of these tracked properties very quickly, where you don't have to do that exercise of going back to the outputs and looking at everything. You simply provide it a question in natural language and get an expression and use it here. Now, I think I am done with this workflow. I'm ready to test it. And so I'm going to ask a question around how I can, test this workflow. So I'm prompting the assistant to provide some example on how I can test this workflow. So this is the workflow assistant gives an example, uh, JSON, which can be used to test this workflow, right? So I'm going to use this. And you can see that it also tells you that you can replace the name, company, country, which are the keys here, with any kind of values or desired data that you have. So I'm not going to go into the testing aspect of it, but but you can. I think this is a very powerful feature where once you build the workflow, you can simply use the workflow assistant to generate a different type of sample payload to test your applications. And while I asked this for a workflow, you could also ask the same question for specific steps if you are interested in, testing some key things in specific steps as you're building the workflow. So instead of workflow, you could simply put the name of the action, and it should provide you, based on the schema, what that sample payload could be like. So I think with this, I wanted to demonstrate that You can use workflow assistant in the context of your workflow and ask very specific questions, both high level in terms of how something is happening, and go deeper down and ask very targeted questions on specific features, and then use that response to build your workflows iteratively. As well as when you're done building, you can also test workflow assistant, test your workflows with using the assistant. So now I'm going to go back to something where this is a I'm starting from scratch here, so I don't have anything. And at this point, you're trying to figure out how to do certain things in logic apps. And one of the examples that I'm going to use is with so many connectors and so many possibilities, you're one always needs to do some research in terms of like what connectors to use. And sometimes you start with a very high level problem statement, right, where you want to connect to some ERP, and what kind of connectors are available in logic apps. So uh, here I have asked a question around provide the examples of ERP integration scenarios using Logic App connectors. So I'm not even going into connector examples. I wanted to see if Logic Apps can actually support, scenarios, ERP integration scenarios, and it gives comes back with a lot of examples on what kind of ERP scenarios you can build using Logic Apps, and how not just one line scenarios, but it also gives you an example that you can trigger on the inventory levels if some threshold is used. So you get really comprehensive details in terms of how you can go about building those end-to-end scenarios and applications. So now that we know that Logic Apps does support these kind of scenarios, let's ask a little bit more specific question on what are the different connectors available for these ERP applications. And this is again, I think, very useful when you are exploring the connector ecosystem, and in many cases you know exactly what you want to connect to. But if you are in the exploration phase and want to see what product supports out of the box with built-in connectors, you can ask these kind of questions and get a response which gives you an idea around the product capabilities. I did move to another question on the poll everywhere. So, and I want to understand, like, as I'm going through these use cases, if if this meets your needs, what else would you like to see for us to bring in, AI capabilities? So, anything that comes to your mind, please do provide feedback. Um, along with this, you can also use workflow assistant here to learn some of the learn more around standards. What are the best practices, for example, for handling errors in logic app workflows? And this should again provide you some standard practices in handling errors, for example, using the scope action, implementing retries and exponential backoffs, using run after the scope, terminate action if you want to stop the workflow execution. So lot of curated information, all brought together in the context of your question, so that you have all the information at your fingertips to make decision on how you want to build these workflows. We also realize that a lot of customers are moving from other platforms, including Logic Apps. And so you should be able to ask questions pertaining to those platforms as well. For now, probably not other platforms, but definitely for BizTalk, where I've asked a question on how I can use BizTalk maps in Logic Apps to transform the data. And it tells you exactly what action you can use, and that you can leverage the same map in Logic Apps as well. Uh, I could actually go into deeper and ask step by step guidance on how to use that map. And in the response, you would see that it provides you detailed step on how you can do that. So I think I did cover most of the scenarios that I wanted to. And before I move to one last feature, I did move to another question on my poll. If you can look at some of the things I we are hearing from customers, from like yourself, what is important for you, and if you can order them based on what's important for you from top to bottom, that would be great. Um, so while we have the data model that we are using, we have spent a lot of time and effort to train it so that it's safe and reliable. So if you ask questions that are not related to logic apps, you should get a response that it's outside the context, it's outside the scope of logic apps, and it should not be able to respond to it. And finally, as you all probably know, that we also have Azure Copilot. So if you if you ask any questions that are outside the scope of logic apps but within the scope of Azure, then we are going to hand do a decent handoff between workflow assistant and copilot. So if you ask any such questions, you should be able to see this experience where you can open Azure Copilot and then get continue there for your non logic app questions. All right. So I think that's all I wanted to cover today in the demo. And I did share the link with everyone before. So would love to hear feedback as you see this video afterwards, or if you have any questions, please do reach out to us. So thank you.
So, Divya, we do have a few questions, if that's all
Okay.
right. Um, so, if you want to defer this question, we could defer it as well. So, why is this branded as Workflow Assistant and not Copilot?
Sorry, I think I should first stop sharing my screen so that I look in the camera. All right. Yeah, I think that's a very good question. Uh, it's just a point in time thing. We do have intention to converge with Azure Copilot. Yeah, it's just something that we wanted to get something in the hands of customers soon, and we are working on that convergence story.
All right, this is interesting. Can you please extend the assistant to also look into the configuration settings? So it would be good to better understand what sort of settings people are interested in. But has that come up at all, just in terms of configuration settings?
I think I'm assuming they are referring to the Logic app work settings, and so I definitely see value in it, and it does come up as things that where they would like to see this assistance. So definitely something that we would consider.
Cool. And there's one more. Another convergence question. So Power Platform has a copilot which creates the flow based on requirements provided in natural language. Can we expect the same from Logic Apps in the near future?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and we actually did consider the what should be the scope for our first release, and we did talk to a lot of seasoned developers as well as new developers for our platform, and we decided to go a little slow because we all heard from people that if you generate a workflow out of the box with like 50 steps and I don't understand half of the steps of that workflow, I may not be ready to use it right away. So we are trying to understand that we want to understand this use case better, that what do you expect when you want to start from scratch. And for simple scenarios, I think it's all good, but you definitely want to use Copilot to help you with more complex scenarios. And what is your expectation that AI should respond you with, and how would you further interact with it after we give you that first line of response. So I think Misbah, this is a great question. If you have any further thoughts on it, please do reach out to me, and I would love to talk to you as well if that works for you.
Sounds good. So that's the end of the questions. There was when you did pause earlier, and we're talking, I believe, about like being able to store information in GitHub and be able to leverage it. There was a definitely yes response by Misbah as well, but that's in the chat there too.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for the validation. Yeah, something we are looking into right now.
Okay. So I think that wraps things up on
Uh,
this session.
no, we have Parth.
Did have one
Oh,
small demo
oh,
on.
I'm sorry. My
No
mistake.
worries.
Yeah. Parth, let's go. My
All right.
bad.
Were you able to see the screen? All right. So I'll quickly go over a use case for Logic Apps. That is, we've been helping people to build the workflows using workflow assistant, but how can you create even workflow assistants by yourself, right? Especially with retrieval augmented generation pattern. This is something which is a standard industry pattern, especially. Let's look at a real scenario, right? And we'll look at uh, after that a small demo as well. There we go. Yeah. So Contoso wants to be able to give a platform for employees to ask questions about their benefits. In this case, that's insurance, right? And they want to give this end-to-end experience that includes, any kind of information that they need. There is a demo sample that we'll be taking a look at from Azure OpenAI. But the main idea here is that we'll take a look at what the current scenario looks like when you build these kinds of models and end-to-end applications. And second, like how would you use Logic Apps for this scenario, right? So when you're looking at this concept, there are two components rather, right? The first is the offline data ingestion, in which you are taking the document, you are going to be indexing it into the vector database. And within that, you need to make sure that you are also creating the embeddings, tokenizing, all those operations, right? Which one has to write code for today, right? Similarly, the second component is the chat experience. So when text comes in, like how do you find the relevant documents depending on the prompt, right? For chat experience, like you use the LLM to search and query based on the prompt. So when question comes, you break it down into embeddings, which is what the LLM computes, and then search using those in the vector database, right? Uh, to create the prompt context and then respond, right? At the end of the day to the client application. So this is a quite arduous process, even though there are just two main components. And how does it look like without Logic Apps? Uh, you need to write a lot of code for these building blocks, right? You need the connectivity, you need the authentication. You also need to make sure that these operations for tokenization, getting the embeddings, calling all the endpoints for OpenAI and AI search uh, should be resilient and reliable, right? Uh, so in this case, like all of this becomes very quickly difficult to handle, especially when you look at the ingestion pipeline. You have a lot of these Python code scripts, which we'll look at the sample in a second. At the same time, you have the backend as well, which is quite complex in Python. Uh, and with Logic Apps, though, it would be a different game with the building blocks, because we are planning to announce two new service providers for Azure OpenAI and AI Search as building blocks. So you can communicate with these services and make sure that you're building the workflows and only focusing on business logic, right? And not quite having to write code for all of it. When you look at the workflow, it's going to be for the ingestion workflow, you have a PDF that will be broken down, be tokenized, in which you to generate the embeddings and then search, index it in the vector database, right? Similarly, for the chat workflow, you need to make sure that when you get the prompt, you create the embeddings so it's readable for the vector database to search from, and then you get the related segments and send the response, right? So for that, like there is a quick demo for both of these flows. Uh, I already have the ingestion data flow created here. In this case, like I have an HTTP trigger which triggers the workflow and gets the document. But think of like the amount of triggers we have, right? We have the event-based trigger and the recurrence trigger as well, in which if you have, let's say, OneDrive or SharePoint, and you're uploading files in real time there, and you want to ingest them, you can do so with those triggers, right? Uh, when you are ingesting this, you are the flow looks pretty simple because you have to compose the inputs and call the tokenize function. Uh, this has a lot of code written behind the scenes. In this case, I will try and just generate. I can find the code really quick. I don't think, but idea is that like we have written a function in this case, which is which is being called from the logic apps, and we're passing in the tokens, and we plan to also make this operation as a built-in operation rather than having this right now, right? So idea is that you have to again write code for this in real life, and after that you have to convert it to the particular JSON schema that can be called for the open AI endpoint to get the embeddings. Once you have that, you are then going to index the documents. And before I show the indexing operation, we already have an Azure OpenAI search, right? So it has these particular document name and the other metadata information that is required. Um, and then in this case, you just create that particular content with the expressions that we have. And as they were showing, like you can easily leverage like the the workflow system to even help create these operations. Uh, and then yeah, once you have that, you are able to simply pass it into indexing the documents, right? And when we trigger this flow, let me just see if I can run it, which is just a API endpoint call right now. So let's see how quick it takes for this to execute, and if it does so, yes. So within seconds, right, like you are able to whip up this entire logic, put it into a canvas, and like even see the status and see like at what point if you want to debug and make sure that the whole ingestion pipeline works seamlessly, right? You are looking at like all of the features that logic app has for generate checking the inputs and outputs. um, and once you have this ingestion flow working, there is something that else that I wanted to show for the chat workflow. But before I show that, I wanted to quickly show you the sample for which you have to chat with, right? So this is the sample in which we are ingesting to all the data into. And you have this prompt that you can ask, hey, does my plan cover annual eye exams? And it should respond in real time. So in this case, Azure Cognitive Services has, you know, all the resources for us to compile the system messages. When you receive the prompt, right, you are trying to generate the search query. And even upon receival, it's a simple HTTP request trigger, which you can accept the prompt type as string. You generate the search query, right? You train it with some sample responses. And once you get the search query and convert it into the embeddings that through which you can search the vector database, you are then creating the final prompt. And that's again just a few JavaScript inline code actions for even generating the search query and creating the prompt. And you are calling the open endpoint to complete the chat and send the response, right? Yet again, these are the two new like connectors that we will be releasing by next year, you can expect. So definitely let us know, and I can quickly trigger this as well. As you saw in that example, we want to ask like, hey, for this particular document that I ingested, does my plan cover annual eye exam, right? So I'm just gonna use HTTP request with payload and run it. Yes, so you get the response, you get the citation. So yes, you are able to quite easily orchestrate for not just from the client front end side of things, but also especially from the ingestion pipeline, and make sure that you are able to ingest data pretty easily, right? So that's all I had. If there are any questions on this, would love to entertain them. If not, we have another demo lined up for using this chat plugin experience with Logic Apps.